film, The Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the television program Slicc. Its continuing mission: to review new movies and to recommend the good ones, to mercilessly ridicule M. Night Shyamalan, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Hello, welcome to this special Star Trek edition of Slicc Flicks. I'm Captain Paul Gibbs.
And I am Commander Patrick Gibbs. The voyages of the Starship Enterprise and the other missions of Starfleet have been thrilling sci-fi geeks around the world since 1966, when Gene Roddenberry brought a modest little show that was pitched to the networks as Wagon Train Among the Stars. Ostensibly, Star Trek only lasted 3 seasons, but its legacy would live on forever.
After 5 TV series, 10 feature films, and its own Las Vegas attraction, what was there left to do with Star Trek? The answer to that question was to return to where it all began. The 11th feature film, entitled simply Star Trek, brings back the original crew, but with new actors. Franchise. Out of danger? Mind meld with us, Patrick.
Sure, hold my tribble. The story begins with the USS Kelvin, a Starfleet ship that is attacked by a mysterious vessel that emerges out of a black hole. When the captain of the ship is killed, a young officer named George Kirk is forced to take command and save the lives of everyone on board, including his pregnant wife, who gives birth to their son in a shuttlecraft, and names the boy James Tiberius Kirk. Sadly, George Kirk does not live to meet his son. Now, as any dedicated fan knows, this is not the past that we know that James T. Kirk lived. From the moment the mysterious vessel comes out of the black hole, an alternate timeline is triggered. But when the grown-up Kirk, played by Chris Pine, gets himself into a bar fight with some Starfleet cadets while trying to impress a beautiful young woman who will only give him her last name, Uhura, he finds himself approached by a seasoned Starfleet captain named Christopher Pike, as portrayed by the always reliable Bruce Greenwood. Pike challenges Kirk to enlist in Starfleet and live up to his genius potential. After some deliberation, young James accepts the challenge, and on the way to the academy, he meets a gruff doctor named McCoy. 3 years later, Kirk is getting ready to graduate and surprises everyone by becoming the first cadet to beat the no-win scenario Kobayashi Maru test, which catches the eye of a hard-nosed superior by the name of Spock, who is convinced that Kirk must have cheated. All of these issues get pushed to the back burner when the fate of the entire Federation is threatened by a mysterious presence. So Pike and his unseasoned young crew board the USS Enterprise to get to the bottom of the situation. The threat turns out to be a Romulan ship, captained by a mysterious, tattooed Romulan by the name of Nero, played to the hilt by the great Eric Bana, who gives us the series' most memorable villain since Khan. To give away any more of the story would only spoil what is destined to be the most joyous, exciting, and utterly engaging movie event of the summer, if not the entire year. Director J.J. Abrams, who gives us Alias and Lost, as well as helming the underrated Mission Impossible 3, is in top form here, handling what is by far the biggest Star Trek film yet with a decidedly deft hand. And the script by Abrams' standard scribes, Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, is the perfect mixture of lovingly referential to the original material and accessible to moviegoers who've never been to a Star Trek film. Abrams keeps the pacing at warp 7, and this movie has more action than any other 3 Trek films put together. But it does so without sacrificing the intelligence and philosophical depth that is at the heart of the best of Trek. This is a rare blockbuster that really succeeds on every level. Chris Pine is a revelation as Kirk, figuratively stepping into William Shatner's girdle with much more ease and cool than we expected. This is a slightly different Kirk than we're used to, with a strong touch of Top Gun's Maverick. It's essential to remember that this is an alternate reality. It's not a reboot. Parallel universes have been a part of Trek lore as long as sexy green alien babes and putty ears. And while it may sound a little confusing, it all works beautifully on the screen. Even more satisfying than Pine is Zachary Quinto as Spock. His voice may be a bit high, but his performance is dead on. And the moment he raises his eyebrow is a moment that will stop the heart of any true Trekker. But the most entertaining performances actually come from the supporting crew, including Shaun of the Dead's Simon Pegg as Montgomery Scott, and last but not least, Carl Urban in an amazing performance as Leonard Bones McCoy. This is a glorious movie, full of wonder, action, intrigue, suspense, and a sense of hope and optimism for the future in the face of impossible odds. In other words, it's Star Trek in its purest form, and it is a cause for rejoicing among fans and non-fans alike. This is the kind of movie that reminds us why we spend the bright, sunlit summer months in a darkened movie theater. Abrams helps the once floundering tentpole of Paramount encounter new life and new civilizations. Star Trek is rated PG-13 for violence, language, and mild sexuality. I love this film.
Oh, definitely an A+.
Without a doubt, this is a big A+.
I almost think it's a waste to release any other films this summer because this one will so... For me, the only one that I think has a chance of coming close is the new Pixar movie, Up.
Right.
And admittedly, a lot of that is because of the sentimental factor of it being Star Trek, but of course, not all Star Trek is anywhere near this good.
No,
Even the biggest fans know that there are really weak Star Trek movies. The last film, Star Trek Nemesis, was not an especially good Star Trek movie.
I left Star Trek Nemesis disappointed, feeling like Star Trek is dead. In fact, we even just recently last year in, ironically, one of last year's biggest flops, The Spirit, Samuel L. Jackson made a joke about, you'll be deader than Star Trek.
Right. Star Trek
that joke doesn't work now.
No, it definitely doesn't at all, especially considering how much more popular Star Trek is than The Spirit at this point. But you hit on probably the most important thing, that this is extremely entertaining, whether you are a diehard Star Trek fan, in which case you're going to get a lot of references and nuances that the average audience member doesn't get, but the average audience member is going to love it as well for the most part. It's that entertaining, that accessible movie, and they're never going to sit there annoyed thinking, well, that must be some sort of in-joke for Trekkies. They're not even going to recognize.
Right. The sheer number of Facebook updates that I've read that have said, I loved Star Trek and I'm not a Trekkie, has been huge, but at the same time, seeing this for the first time with an audience that was full of a lot of Star Trek fans, there was a sense of giddiness.
Right.
The first time we heard things like Bones McCoy saying, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a physicist." It just...
Well, and he could not have been more perfect in that role. All of the actors were very good in the parts. They're not really, for the most part, doing impersonations of the original cast. They're just evoking those characters.
Carl Urban is doing a bit of an impersonation of DeForest Kelley, but he makes the character his own.
He does.
He brings it to life. It's a character, not a caricature, and that makes a big difference. And one person that has to be mentioned...
Anton Yelchin.
Anton Yelchin as Chekhov. Oh my goodness. The moment he comes on screen, everybody, male and female in the audience, absolutely fell in love with this guy.
He's just one of the most likable on-screen presences I've seen in a long time.
And as soon as he starts speaking as Chekhov, I was reminded of Philip J. Fry from Futurama when he meets Walter Koenig on the Star Trek episode. The moment Anton Yelchin started talking, I just went, "Eee! Now saying nuclear vessels." He just created the presence of him. And I also want to mention John Cho, who brought, growing up as a Star Trek fan, I read all the Star Trek novels.
Right.
Well, not all of them, because there are about 40,000 of them, but I read a lot of them. And my favorite character in the novels was Hikaru Sulu. He was so cool in those novels, and he was a fighter. He was such a man of action. But then as I watched the films and the series, that never really translated in George Takei's performance. That was never really there so much in the films as it was in the books.
And it kind of detracts these days when our impression of Mr. Sulu is trading insults with William Shatner over whether or not he's invited to his wedding. But
this true. At the moment where Kirk and Sulu are fighting on the ship. Any moment I expected to see Sulu lop Kirk's head off, and then I reminded, oh, this isn't Shatner, so it doesn't matter.
But he did a great job with the role. Chris Pine, as you mentioned, is very good as Kirk. I was worried about Chris Pine. The only thing I'd seen him in before was one of my least favorite movies of the decade, Blind Dating, which he was pretty good in that movie, and it made me think he could be very good in an actual movie, and that's what we
right. He was one of the few saving graces of that film.
But the best performance for me was from Leonard Nimoy as the actual Spock.
Well, you're doing something wrong if you make a Star Trek movie and you could say that the best performance doesn't come from Leonard Nimoy.
And he was terrific. Eric Bana was terrific.
Eric Bana, there's an actor. I'm tired of defending him from detractors. Eric Bana is a multifaceted, terrific actor who I think most people just don't get. I'm going to say this now because Yelena's not on this episode to argue it. His Bruce Banner in the original Hulk was a multifaceted, deep character that was much better than Edward Norton gave us, because Banner is a very internalized actor, and he brought a depth to the character of Nero and a pain that I really felt, and made him. This was the villain that Shinzon in Nemesis was supposed to be. Whereas I didn't care about that character at all. I felt something for Nero.
It should be pointed out that the one thing that the very few people who are detracting from this movie at all are kind of saying, well, this is not really Star Trek at its most intellectual, its most socially relevant.
Not its most cerebral, certainly.
But that was usually more the province of television Star Trek. When you look at the movies, they have certainly been more action stories as a whole to try and sell them better to audiences, and this is up there
absolutely
with those. With the best Star Trek movies, with Wrath of Khan and First Contact and Voyage Home. There used to be, of course, everybody talked about there being a pattern that the even-numbered Star Trek movies were great and the odd-numbered Star Trek movies were not so great. This one following Nemesis completely blows that idea.
It hits it with a barrage of photon torpedoes. There's no question which of the two is better. Other performances that have to be mentioned, Zoe Saldana as Uhura is just an absolute delight.
And of course, Simon Pegg, as you mentioned, I think a lot of people may be disappointed with how long it takes him to get into the movie, but when he does, it's more than worth the wait. And he has one of my favorite Trekkie geek references where he makes an offhand reference to the lead character from the TV series Star Trek Enterprise, which
and
a lot of people aren't getting.
Nobody's seen the movie 3 times and have not heard anybody really seem to recognize that joke, but then I think we were the only people that
actually kept watching Enterprise.
Yeah, and the only people that recognized the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles joke in the Crystal Skull.
Right.
And that comes down to the fact that, let's face it, we're incredible geeks.
Right.
But, this is Star Trek. It's made for geeks, and we celebrate it.
But this particular Star Trek is also extremely enjoyable to non-geeks.
It really is. You're going to have, even if you're a Fast and the Furious kind of person, you are going to enjoy this movie.
Even if you're the kind of shallow, soulless person who doesn't enjoy Star Trek, you'll probably enjoy this one.
All right.
On the subject of J.J. Abrams' new film, there's a great supplement to this film that you may or may not have heard of. Star Trek Countdown, which first appeared as a serialized comic book but is now available altogether in graphic novel form. The story, which was developed by writers Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman, gives us a deeper look into the character of Nero and his motivations, and also offers a chance to see some of your favorite Next Generation characters again. If you haven't seen the new film, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Countdown first.
And even if you have seen the film, this is a must for the hardcore fan, as it really gives a greater depth of understanding to the Nero character. As I said before, Nero is a terrific character, but you don't quite see in the movie his full backstory. And this one, by reading this comic book, you'll understand his full motivation for why he has so much anger and why so much of that anger is directed at Spock. And it's also a much better send-off for the Next Generation crew than the pitiful last installment, Star Trek Nemesis. Countdown's available at most local bookstores. Next up, we're going to take a look back at the very first feature film in the Star Trek franchise, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And here's Paul to give us the big picture.
The 1979 film Star Trek: The Motion Picture was the first big-screen incarnation of the popular sci-fi saga, reuniting the original cast and directed by Robert Wise, editor of Citizen Kane and director of The Sound of Music and The Day the Earth Stood Still. The story, by Harold Livingston and Alan Dean Foster, concerns a mysterious entity attacking Klingons and Federation starships and threatening to destroy the Earth itself. Admiral James T. Kirk must once again take command of the Starship Enterprise and intercept this attacker, saving the world as we know it. When you spell it out like that, it sounds like an exciting Star Trek story, but anyone who's seen the film knows that a painfully slow pace and a lack of humor and charm make this perhaps the least entertaining film of the series. And the complexities of the plot and lack of explanation of the Trek universe make it also perhaps the least accessible to non-fans, who are likely to get the mistaken impression that Star Trek revolves around the new characters Captain Decker and Lieutenant Ilia, who incidentally seem to have been reworked a decade later as Commander Riker and Counselor Troy of The Next Generation. The story is fairly intriguing science fiction, and it's exciting to see Star Trek on a big budget, with what were, for the time, cutting-edge special effects, and the film has a terrific score by the late Jerry Goldsmith. But it's so caught up in trying to emulate Stanley Kubrick's 2001 that it forgets that Star Trek on television was as much a campy, fun adventure as it was cerebral sci-fi, and the fun is lost. The characters fans love are lifeless, left without meaningful character arcs, and even Dr. McCoy's attempts at comic relief fall flat. In fact, the movie nearly achieves what Spock does not, the purging of all recognizable human emotion. It's not terrible, it's just boring and not very fun. Few would have predicted that this dreary movie would spawn 11 sequels. Star Trek: The Motion Picture only gets a C from me.
Absolutely. These things are everywhere. Okay, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, in my opinion, is basically just a gigantic vanity piece for Gene Roddenberry.
It was.
I think you had a series that was, as we said before, pitched as wagon train among the stars, and it became almost a religion to so many people, and this really went to Roddenberry's head.
It did. Roddenberry deserves a lot of credit for creating Star Trek, but there were also a lot of other people like Gene L. Coon and D.C. Fontana who did great work on the series, who really were, in many ways, as big a part of this as Roddenberry was. And I think that Roddenberry did kind of get an inflated sense that Star Trek had been this vision rather than just a really great TV series. And of course the appeal is that it has that great vision of the future and everything, but that level of self-importance really drags down Star Trek.
Well, you mentioned 2001, and you hit it right on the head. He was jealous of 2001. He wanted to be Stanley Kubrick and, help me out, the author's name.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke. I'm going to get harassment from friends for temporarily forgetting that name. But he wanted to be both of them in one. He also wanted to be George Lucas, yet he didn't inject enough of that sense of life and fun into it. And, I'm not meaning to completely bash on Roddenberry. Roddenberry is the father of Star Trek, and we owe a lot to him.
We just wish he'd maybe lightened up a bit on this film.
I think he just got carried away.
Right. Fortunately, after this one, producer Harv Bennett took control of the franchise and gave us Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, widely considered the best of the Star Trek movies, quite possibly the best of the Star Trek movies, maybe now tied with J.J. Abrams' new film.
But, there are things I like about the opening sequence.
It's terrific.
The cloud with the Klingons. I love that sequence, and the music, everything is fantastic.
It's not a terrible movie. It's just a slow one that's just not anywhere near as much fun as it should be.
Well, and being directed by Robert Wise, honestly, one of the great directors of all. I mean, this guy gave us The Sound of Music, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
The Day the Earth Stood Still. He really was a great director.
You just have a right to expect a little bit more from that, and I think that that's a failing of the script and of Roddenberry's meddling without question. What sums this movie up to me is, you remember years ago, the old Villa Theater was doing a day-long screening of all six of the original cast movies.
And it was harder to sit through this one than it was to sit through the other 5.
It really was.
Fortunately, like we said, the movie series did get better as it progressed. When we return, we'll talk about some more of the highs and lows of Star Trek over the years. Don't go anywhere.
Horseradish. Is that for horses? Remember me, Mr. Lobster? From last Tuesday? Banana. 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 Here comes the rain. We need a hat. And why do we need a hat? That's right.
When you talk with your child, you build vocabulary, and learning starts long before school does. For more tips, go to bornlearning.org.
Yeah, this is Utah. Welcome to our playground. Here you'll find 5 national parks, over 40 state parks, and more shoreline than the U.S. Pacific coast. From the desert to the lakes to the canyons to the mountains, whatever it is you like to do, you'll find the place to do it best right here in Utah. So come see for yourself. Experience a vacation like none other. Request a travel guide at www.utah.travel.
Welcome back to this special Star Trek edition of Slick Flicks. Next up, we're going to talk about a mission of the Next Generation crew, Star Trek First Contact. Paul, give us a status report.
Alone among the Next Generation films, Star Trek First Contact fully succeeds as a large-scale movie rather than an extended TV episode. The plot has the Enterprise battling the Borg, among the most popular of the series' villains, who travel back in time to prevent Earth from ever making contact with alien races. Captain Picard leads half of the Enterprise crew in a thrilling fight against the Borg, while Commander Riker leads the rest in a humorous and entertaining effort to help scientist Zefram Cochrane, played by James Cromwell, create warp drive and contact the Vulcans. Every member of the crew is given at least one memorable moment, and Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner stand out, as was so often the case on the television series. Jonathan Frakes, the actor who played Commander Riker, makes a spectacular feature film directing debut here, in a film that captures nearly all of the best qualities of Star Trek and ranks up there with The Wrath of Khan and The Voyage Home. If subsequent Next Generation features had been nearly as good as this one, there never would have been any need to reboot Star Trek. First Contact gets an A+ for me.
Yeah, it's a terrific film. I think I may only give it an A simply because I feel like, for me, the opening section of the film is a little bit rushed. They jump, and this is a subject of some debate. Some people really like the fact that they jump so quickly into the plot.
From a narrative point of view of making this movie play as exciting as it does, the rushed opening works. Where it's disappointing is from a fan's perspective. In the previous film, Star Trek Generations, this is actually a better film, but we were left with the Enterprise destroyed and kind of an expectation that we were going to see these characters moving on to new things.
Exactly. That was the thing. Is I was really eager to see the Enterprise is destroyed. What happens next?
Suddenly they're all back
is
on
Riker
a new
going to
Enterprise.
finally become a captain? We just come back. It's like nothing ever happened except there's a new ship. Now, that being said, that's my only criticism, and it may not be enough to bump it down from an A+. This movie, having grown up as a teenager with Star Trek The Next Generation being not only my favorite TV show, but just about my biggest reason for living, this movie just blew me away.
Well, it's funny, it's exciting. Jonathan Frakes, who had done such a great job directing episodes of the TV series,
Like,
really
Cause and Effect, I think, was the first episode that really made me notice Frakes as a director and think, this is the guy who should be directing the films if they ever get around to making Next Generation films.
He, in a lot of publicity, talked about watching not only Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock and some of the best Star Trek movies to get inspiration, but also movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and The Empire Strikes Back and the Indiana Jones films and Ridley Scott's original Alien and James Cameron's sequel Aliens. And he really did capture a lot of those things in this one. Like I said, it's the only time a Next Generation film really fully made that jump up to being a feature film. The other ones in the series kind of felt like two-part season-ending cliffhanger episodes, and in some cases they weren't actually as good as some of the best of those two-part episodes of the TV series were.
Absolutely. I think, I still think All Good Things may be the best Next Generation film, and that was a 2-hour episode of the series.
Right.
But this one was terrific. Alice Krieg as the Borg Queen is another one of the best villains ever in the series, and the interplay between her and Data is absolutely fantastic.
Now, we should mention the one common criticism of this movie against this movie by Star Trek fans is an idea that it's sort of revisionist Star Trek because it contradicts some previous accounts of Zefram Cochrane's first warp flight, things like that. Most of those things that this contradicts are from Star Trek novels or other quote-unquote non-canonical sources. So we're talking about really ancillaries of Star Trek that don't really count as real Star Trek. And come on, people, it's a TV series. Don't take it quite so seriously.
It puts me in mind of William Shatner's famous Saturday Night Live appearance where he did the sketch where he was speaking at a convention and said, "Why don't you people get a life?" And, I think he was speaking to those people. He was speaking to us. He was speaking to all of these fans. As two people who have been to Star Trek conventions and met George Takei, Walter Koenig, Michael Dorn. I can't be too hard on those people because I am one of those people, and I'm cool with that.
Right.
But at the same time, I agree with you. Lighten up. They made a great movie.
Well, and it's not as if, as much as I love and respect Star Trek, and I do more so than just about any, Star Trek is not just a TV series or a movie to me. It's so much more. But come on, let's accept the fact that there have been some big gaps and holes in the continuity all along. It's not like this is perfectly sketched out from beginning to end and there are no deviations in the continuity before First Contact. There are huge ones from day one of the series where they weren't even calling it Starfleet yet.
Absolutely.
The important thing is that this is as entertaining a Star Trek movie as we've ever had. Every bit as good as The Wrath of Khan, in my opinion, if not even better.
Absolutely. The one real tragedy of this movie, to me, is, like you said, it was such an impressive directorial debut for a feature film for Jonathan Frakes, and then his career has just not really panned out, which is a crying shame because I don't think he deserved that. A big part of that
was that he directed the next somewhat disappointing Next Generation film, Star Trek Insurrection.
But that was not a bad film. No. And I was one of its detractors when it first came out. I will admit that. I was one of the people that said, that's it. But the bottom line is all it was an episode of the series put on a big screen.
And the weaknesses are really not in Jonathan Frakes' direction. They're more in the scripts and
yeah. It was a good episode of the series, and it was well directed. Unfortunately, now Frakes has been relegated. So far, he's back to directing TV, but I'm really hoping that one of these days we see a full-fledged return to feature films from him because this is a phenomenal directing talent we have here.
As Monty Python would say, and now for something completely different. We're going to review a film that is not technically a part of the Star Trek series, but is as beloved to most Trekkers out there as anything Gene Roddenberry ever created, the 1999 comedy classic Galaxy Quest. Pedal to the metal, Commander.
17 years after the popular television space drama Galaxy Quest has ended, the stars of the show have been reduced to convention appearances and store openings. Only Jason Nesmith, played by Tim Allen, the egomaniacal star, and crew commander, enjoys the devoted fan base. His other crew members are less enthusiastic, fed up with being typecast by their roles on the show. At a convention, Jason meets an eccentric group of people claiming to be extraterrestrial beings called Thermians, led by a man identifying himself as Mathazar, who asks him to appear in what Jason assumes to be an amateur episode. Nesmith humors them, whereupon the Thermians transport him to their spaceship to negotiate with Ceres, a reptilian humanoid warlord engaged in a genocidal war against the Thermians. Ceres demands the Omega-13, a device mentioned but not used in Galaxy Quest's final episode. Now, due to a hangover, Jason thinks this situation is fictional and orders them to attack Ceres before asking permission to return home. Jason is sent to Earth through space in a gelatinous pod, and at this point realizes that the ordeal he just went through was very real. Before long, the entire crew is brought into space to help the Thermians fight the vengeful Ceres. Forget American Beauty or The Sixth Sense. This was my pick for the best film of 1999. Galaxy Quest is a must-see for any Star Trek fan and captures the spirit of obsessive fandom and the bittersweet feelings of an actor who is forever a legend for taking part in such a beloved show, but is doomed to never be taken seriously as anything else. I'm not normally a big fan of Tim Allen, but he gives a terrific performance here in a thinly disguised version of William Shatner, pulling off the comedy and the action elements of the character with ease. No less entertaining are Sigourney Weaver as Gwen, the requisite sex symbol and communications officer, Alan Rickman as Alexander Dane, also known as Dr. Lazarus, the serious-minded alien crew member, and the scene-stealing Tony Shalhoub as Fred Kwan, who played the role of Tech Sergeant Chen. Shalhoub provides some of the film's funniest moments, as Kwan is not the least bit fazed by finding himself suddenly thrown into space with a bunch of real live aliens, and just goes along with whatever is expected of him. In fact, everyone just steps into the positions they filled on board their fictional ship, never even questioning it. But the best performances, perhaps, come from Enrico Colantoni as Mathazar, giving a hilarious and surprisingly deep turn as the naive and trusting alien, and by Sam Rockwell as Guy Flugelman, a smarmy actor who's been riding the coattails of Galaxy Quest for years, despite having appeared on only one episode and his character not even being important enough to be given a name. I loved this movie with a passion, and it just gets better with each viewing. By Grabthar's hammer, by the Sons of Warvan, Galaxy Quest is the quintessential Star Trek parody, and gets a very, very enthusiastic A+ from me.
You know, I did not have really high expectations for this
Absolutely
movie.
not.
But when it ended, I found myself saying, I could watch this movie every day for the rest of my life. It's so funny, it so perfectly captures the spirit of Star Trek, it's so entertaining, and you wouldn't believe how many days end with me in bed thinking, I could have watched Galaxy Quest today and I would be much happier right now. One of the best choices I think they make is to not go the Mad Magazine route in parodying Star Trek or the characters.
Right.
The names Jason Nesmith or Commander Peter Quincy Taggart don't sound like William Shatner and James T. Kirk.
We don't have William Shatner playing Captain Quirk or any of that cheesy stuff.
Even the characters are a little bit different. They've kind of combined McCoy and Spock into one character in Dr. Lazarus.
And we have Daryl Mitchell's character, who is really kind of a nod to Wesley Crusher from The Next Generation.
Right. By diversifying like that and everything, it's just a little bit stronger as a story. It's
Absolutely.
not quite so dorky in Mad Magazine, as I pointed out. And it's just... this is just one of the most perfectly entertaining films ever made, and it really, to me, captures the essence of the fact that the best parody is done by people who love the material of which they're doing a parody. You don't want parody to be too mean and hard-edged. You want more of this kind of happy, loving feeling from it. It's hilariously funny, and it does take some pretty pointed jabs at Star Trek, but it still has that love of the material going through it.
It's not like watching Family Guy, where it's constant. Hey, you remember how stupid this show was? I hate this show. Laugh at how dumb it was. These people loved Star Trek and are giving a tribute to it as much as they are making fun of it.
And as for how well it's going to appeal to people who aren't Star Trek fans, I think it's really still going to be entertaining to non-fans, and also I just don't care about those people.
Yeah, absolutely. But Sam Rockwell, come on. This is the same year that he appeared in The Green Mile, and wow, what a year for him. I saw him in The Green Mile and was so utterly creeped out by the horribleness of that villain.
I didn't think I'd ever be able to watch him in anything else again.
And a few weeks later, he was making me fall on the floor laughing in Galaxy Quest.
Giving as funny a performance as I have ever seen in a movie.
And it leads to Sigourney Weaver giving what may be my favorite line in movie history. We've got to get out of here before one of these things kills Guy.
Because the character that Sam Rockwell is playing assumes that because he's not important enough to have a name, that maybe he's just there to get killed to show how serious the situation is, which is one of the funniest parts of the movie, the way everyone just starts subconsciously fitting into the characters they played on the TV series and just kind of playing out the roles of these characters. Jason Nesmith becomes the commander because he was in the TV series.
Well, I think that the theme of the movie is the blurring of the line between reality and fantasy, which is what Star Trek's all about, is what Star Trek fandom's all about. It's why we're devoting an entire episode to talking about Star Trek, often as if these things really happened, because a lot of us here, and wonderfully represented by the character that Justin Long plays, that was me as a teenager.
Absolutely.
There was a part of me that really secretly believed all of this was real, and that one day I was going to be serving on board a starship, and I haven't completely given up that hope.
This is definitely on my list of top 5 favorite comedies of all time, up there with movies like Dr. Strangelove and To Be or Not to Be.
Absolutely, but it's also got some great action and some true depth to it. It's just all around Galaxy Quest. It's a perfect film.
It is.
And now we're going to close with our choices for the top 10 best episodes of Star Trek. Number 10, Star Trek The Menagerie. Spock comes to the aid of his former captain, Christopher Pike, taking him to the planet Talos IV, inhabited by a race of powerful beings who create illusions which are indistinguishable from reality.
Number 9 is the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Cause and Effect, which we previously mentioned. The crew of the Enterprise D are caught in a time loop, repeating the same series of events over and over, a series of events which culminates in the destruction of the Enterprise and the death of everyone on board.
Number 8 is Star Trek Voyager: The Killing Game. After Voyager is captured by the Hydrogens, the ship is turned into a massive holodeck so that the Hydrogens can hunt members of the crew who have been fitted with new identities in various scenarios based upon Federation histories. You know, this has got Star Trek and Nazis. Who could ask for anything more?
Number 7 is the Star Trek Enterprise episode, Judgment. Captain Jonathan Archer of the Enterprise NX-01 is arrested by the Klingon Empire for conspiring with rebels, and he is brought before a tribunal.
Number 6 is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Past Tense, a 2-part episode that chronicles the story of a transporter accident which sends Captain Sisko, Jadzia Dax, and Dr. Bashir to 2024 San Francisco. Apprehended by a pair of policemen, Sisko and Bashir are taken to a sanctuary district, a gated area of the city where homeless, mentally ill, and unemployed people are locked away from the rest of society. After Gabriel Bell, an important historical figure, is accidentally killed, Sisko must take his place and fulfill Bell's heroic destiny.
Number 5 is Star Trek The Next Generation, The Best of Both Worlds. The crew of the Enterprise does battle with their most formidable enemy, the Borg, and Captain Picard is captured and transformed into Locutus of Borg, in probably the single best season-ending cliffhanger in television history.
Number 4, original series Star Trek, The Corbomite Maneuver. When a mysterious alien commander named Baylock threatens to destroy the Enterprise, Captain Kirk bluffs him by creating an elaborate story of a secret device called Corbomite, which will destroy both ships. Baylock backs down, and when Kirk and Bones beam aboard the ship, they find that Baylock is a childlike creature that's only been toying with them all along.
Number 3 is Star Trek The Next Generation, All Good Things. The final episode of Next Generation features Captain Picard shifting back and forth through time, encountering a singularity in space, and his old nemesis, Q, played by John Delancey.
Number 2, Star Trek City on the Edge of Forever. A Hugo Award-winning episode. Star Trek's first great foray into time travel. Kirk and Spock follow a drugged and delirious McCoy through a portal called the Guardian of Forever and return to Depression-era New York, where Kirk falls in love with a young political activist named Edith Keeler, played by Joan Collins, and is forced to make the toughest decision he has ever made as a starship captain.
And our choice for the number 1 all-time episode of Star Trek is the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, I, Borg. A member of the dangerous cybernetic race known as the Borg is captured by the Enterprise crew and examined. The crew are initially wary of the rescued Borg, which is eventually given the name Hugh, but during the course of the interactions which follow, they begin to rethink their attitudes toward the Borg. Now, this one, I'm sure there are going to be some Star Trek fans out there saying, you picked I, Borg as the best episode.
It was the episode that made me absolutely fall in love with Next Generation. And, you know, when I think of the words, I am Hugh,
I would choose to stay with Geordi.
I tear up just thinking about it. This episode,
it's a very subjective list all around. This is our choices for the 10 best Star Trek episodes, our 10 favorite episodes, and the list is even a bit subjective to us. There are episodes like the original series episode, the Enterprise Incident, or the Deep Space Nine episode, The Way of the Warrior, that I had a really hard time leaving off.
Or Amok Time.
From the original series. So many Next Generation episodes. We did try to we wanted to give an overall view of Star Trek here and make sure that we included an episode from every single series, even the series like Enterprise and Voyager that weren't as good as the Next Generation and the original series. So fans out there can debate these choices all they want. We'll probably be debating them for the rest of our lives.
Right, but at the same time, people need to remember that we are never wrong.
And that wraps up our special Star Trek episode of Slick Flicks. Join us next time when we'll go back to reviewing some of the summer's biggest releases.
Until then, live long and prosper.